Good evening and welcome to Special Assignment. I'm your host, Ashraf Garda. This month we commemorate human rights. 10 years ago, on the 21st of March 2003, the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations were handed over to then-President Thabo Mbeki. The dossier had, among others, a list of people to be prosecuted after failing to apply for amnesty. But 5 years ago, Travesty Simani and other families of the victims fought and won a court case against the proposed amendments to the NPA Act to grant amnesty to the perpetrators without the victims' involvement. Victims can now demand the prosecution of the perpetrators who failed to apply for amnesty. We take you back to that story when Tembi in Kadimeng, sister of apartheid victim Nocatula Simani, was gearing up to fight against these amendments.
I have lived and embraced the pain from the tender age of about 14 years. It's not Nocatula's past which makes who I am. It is part of who I am. Me coming into the dam, closer to the dam, to the room which didn't have window, no ventilation. I was actually suffocating myself, having been there not more than an hour. This was a woman who took a decision that my country comes first, irregardless of how painful or how difficult or immense the torture could be.
"25 years ago, this deserted strip of dirt road echoed with the screams of a young woman. Nocatula Simani, an operative of the ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto weSizwe, had been abducted by security police in Johannesburg. She was taken to a farm in Rustenburg. Over 5 weeks, she was chained, thrown into a dam and repeatedly tortured. Then she disappeared.
She was a leader of many societies. Politically, she was a leader as well. At home, she was the firstborn. She was a leader of the family. So there have been immense pressure on me to leave her path.
28 years later, her family still do not know her fate.
I have accepted in a way that I may not be able to lay my hands into the remains. She's certainly not alive. We can't even go to appease our spirits at the point where she died because we don't know the spot.
What is known from testimony at the TRC over a decade later is that her torturers were possibly the last people to see her alive. By then, according to one of the policemen who abducted her, she had been so brutally beaten that she was unrecognizable and could no longer walk.
She was in a crouching position in the boot of the car with some leg irons. The hands were fastened with handcuffs at the back. The next day, when I asked Sergeant Pretorius about the whereabouts of the lady, she said to me, "Munibaya Fran."
Part of the reason for the TRC was for a battered society to come to terms with the truth of its brutal past and embrace a future of peace and reconciliation. Amnesty was offered to perpetrators of human rights violations, both by apartheid agents and liberation fighters. In order to qualify for amnesty, perpetrators had to make a full disclosure, show that the violence was politically motivated, and that it was proportionate with a motive. Several of the security police who abducted Nocatula also faced other allegations of human rights abuse, such as Willem Timokutsia. He ran the Soweto intelligence unit. He and his fellow officers were denied amnesty because they gave conflicting evidence about her torture and disappearance. And in terms of TRC legislation, they were liable for prosecution.
At the farm, was she willing to give you any answers to the information that you wanted?
Yes, Chairperson.
No, I don't remember her naming any contact here in South Africa. She would deny everything and then she would be assaulted. They shot her, killed her and buried her in Rustenburg.
There is a suggestion that you killed Similani.
I deny it.
What was simply expected to happen after that was for the NPA to issue out investigators, to pursue and finish off the investigation as ran by the TRC, and charge Coetzee, Pretorius, and more. Simple.
Coming up, victims demand justice.
These were the scenes across townships in Gauteng's East Rand during the 80s and early 90s. When it came to acts of violence, the faces of the perpetrators straddled the racial and political divide. Human rights violations were committed not just by the apartheid government's security forces, but also by the foot soldiers of the liberation movement and other political parties. During this period, the names of the sprawling townships of the East Rand, from Thokoza to Tembisa to Katlehong, became synonymous with unrest and violence.
Mina ngalimala ngo-1993 nge-20 zikaNovemba kwangena umfana endini efake ijazi elimnyama efake neduku elibomvu. So ngesa sikhathi kwakuyisayini ukuthi makafake iduku elibomvu ungobe IFP yena. So wangithola ngihleli mina ngibukele iTV endlini. Wafike wadubula endlini. Wangidubula mina nge4 bullets.
This memorial park was constructed to remember those who died, but many more have disappeared without a trace. This victim cannot show her face. She still fears for her life.
Ingalo zoyi2 nasesifubeni nasemva kwendlebe yaphuma la eslathini la ebusweni la ngaphambili. Enye ibullet yes5 yashaya iwindow. Makaceda dubula wabaleka. Ngifuna ugovernment angimove ngizokhona ukuphila kahle. Ngoba phela mangihamba nasestradini mina ngikhululekanga. Ngoba ngiyacabanga ukuthi lo muntu njengoba wangilimaza usezongiphinda.
A name and a number in a cardboard file. These are the lives and stories of some 45,000 of apartheid's victims from across the country. As their files gather dust, they wait for their day in court. Many have never even heard of the TRC.
After the TRC Act, government came out with a policy which sort of gave NPA a prerogative to go back to the perpetrators and sort of negotiate or talk to them and plea bargain with them. And we are against that. We are against that because the TRC was basically about that.
In April 2003, former President Thabo Mbeki made an announcement about how the prosecutions will be carried forward. The amendments were promulgated in December 2005. According to the amendments, the applicant can approach the NPA with an affidavit revealing the whole truth. They can request a plea bargain or reduced sentence. The applicant's age, health and other personal factors are considered. An attempt will be made to consult victims, though not a guarantee. A final decision on the matter rests solely with the National Director of Public Prosecutions. Public interest is considered, and unlike the TRC, this process is conducted behind closed doors. Critics question the need for these amendments, since plea bargaining already exists. For those who lost loved ones, these changes to the law are just a convenient way to allow perpetrators to evade justice. Tragically, Nocatula's family had laid charges of assault against her abductors long before the TRC began in 1995. But after 20 years, those charges have lapsed.
We spend our own legal fees. When we are about to close it, the country agrees to a process. We acted in good faith. We felt that national reconciliation was important for all of us. It wasn't more about a family case. South Africa was crying. We joined the process. And then we get betrayed at the end.
Jan Wagenaar, a Pretoria lawyer, represents several members of the apartheid-era security establishment. Many of his clients appeared before the TRC.
Regarding the assault part, they cannot be charged anymore. We all know that in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, after 20 years, you can't proceed with the prosecution. And if there's someone out there with evidence that my clients or whoever killed this lady, so be it. Then the prosecuting authority can prosecute in any event.
We know that she came to Johannesburg on a mission, using the cover of buying shoes for her graduation from Swaziland University. She was set up by Norman Konza, who she thought was a comrade, but who in fact was an apartheid spy. He lured her to the basement where Kutsia was waiting for her. She was abducted and repeatedly assaulted. For her family, the pain of not knowing how she died is the harshest consequence of all.
Yes, goodbye. Yes, goodbye. Nocatula's father dies without even knowing what happened to her. It's only the truth which can heal me.
On the 21st of March 2001, and he said there was no need for him to go out and celebrate human rights because he believes his human rights, he fought for them, he acquired them, but yet nobody now makes sure that his real right to bury his child is being realized.
But Thembi is determined not to allow the truth to be shrouded in silence. At this recent conference on the TRC and its recommendations, she spoke out strongly against the amendments. She has taken the Justice Ministry and NPA to court, as well as the police who abducted and tortured her sister. She is joined in the case by the widows of 4 Eastern Cape activists, the Cradock 4, who were killed by the security police in 1984. The Legal Resources Centre has taken on their case.
In a moment, the former generals speak for themselves.
Marjorie Jobson of the Khulumani Victim Support Group is working hard to organise victims across the country. She says currently they have close to 200 cases that they believe are prosecutable.
I think that the cases where there's sufficient evidence and where there are still people that can be called should be prosecuted, because failing to do that has left us with what we call a culture of impunity, where people feel if you wait long enough, if you turn your back on official processes long enough, you can actually get away with anything.
These victims and their families are pinning their hopes on the upcoming case.
Atubuleke ekhanda sithi namanje ibullet lalo ngisaphila nalo kumanje sengize nesifo soku
yiso njengoba ngibona sangidubula amehlo nasemzimbeni njengoba ngilanje futhi ladubulele wane lihlo ipoison le yatata le yangena njengoba ngasabona
ye wa ka yena ba mothunya tsa go mmolaya ibile ba mothunya ne ba mogabela so ka ntwe ka lepaka le la bona le ka ba remelela ba rema ba mohlaba ka dingola ba hlaba mo mpeteng di yo mogwetsa ka motla se ga mpete a tšhabetse ka ntse ke mo ka shetse a tlile ba mogogile ba mail mo ba tšhela parafeng ba molaeta.
Thousands of victims like these say their struggle seems to have been in vain. One case in which the amendments were applied related to the trial of former Minister of Law and Order Adrian Vlok. He was implicated in the poisoning of former SA Council of Churches head Reverend Frank Chikane. The Vlok trial, wherein he was handed a suspended sentence, was widely condemned. The generals say the TRC was biased.
These were desperate times. What we were doing were actually an effort to prevent certain acts of violence. We were not the aggressors. The security forces were quite shocked to see the unreasonable and quite discriminating way in which these provisions provide for the whole process. We had many consultations with various persons, including Mr. F. de Wilde-Klerk, Mr. Mbeki. They've decided to come forward with certain directives to rectify all the flaws and shortcomings in the Act.
The extent of influence in the drafting of the amendments by apartheid-era security personnel, like Van der Merwe, is not clear. Critics of the amendments say at the very least the NPA should consult the victims or their families. They also claim there is often not full disclosure of the facts.
And if you think of that's almost sick joke of the so-called trial of former Minister Vlok and General Van der Merwe, a morning in court, sort of greeting their fans and their followers, acknowledging their guilt of one particular act, receiving a suspended sentence, no cross-examination, no victims present, and off they go.
The NPA denies that it has been reluctant to prosecute perpetrators of apartheid-era crimes, saying, "We have, to the extent it was possible and practical, considered and in fact prosecuted persons who were either refused amnesty or had not applied for amnesty." The NPA cites a number of cases, including the Bishu massacre, the prosecution of right-wing leader Eugene Tablanche for several bombings, and the case of the PEBCO 3 activists currently in the news. Some question what criteria will be used to select cases for prosecution if the amendments are repealed.
The prosecuting authority is then as fearless and as objective as it should be in terms of the constitution of this country. They will have to prosecute people from all sides of the erstwhile conflict. And that may even include very prominent people in this country as we sit here today. And I'm quite sure that that will be, from the angle of the broad interests of our country, it will be totally counterproductive.
The day has finally arrived. The applicants arrive at the Pretoria High Court with their lawyer, with the hope of convincing the authorities that the law is unconstitutional and a violation of their right to administrative justice.
What we're arguing is that the amendment to the National Prosecuting Act, what it does is it gives the power to the NDPP. It vests them with power to decide not to prosecute matters. And what we're seeing, that amounts to an indemnity or an amnesty for people who have committed crimes under the apartheid regime. So we are challenging the constitutionality of giving the power to the NDPP to make that decision, because it is not subject to court scrutiny.
Justice to me will be meaning prosecution of people involved after they were not granted amnesty by the TRC, and them facing justice.
What disheartens me is the fact that nothing has been done, about the perpetrators that violated the rights of our husbands, the right to life, the right to dignity, and the right to security. And those are the things that we thought that when these people didn't disclose completely before the amnesty, that those things will be taken up, immediately, and see to it that these people are brought to book.
Pretoria High Court Judge Francis Lechodi reserved judgment and did not indicate when he would give a ruling on the matter.
It has affected me a lot because it's like I hope something can come out so that I can find peace within myself. I mean, my husband was murdered here. Everybody knows that. People have been murdered. And I think they also have a right to live. as the Constitution is saying now. And I feel the only thing that will put me in peace, my heart in peace, is for these people to be prosecuted and be charged for murder.
The former generals questioned the motive of those taking this matter to court, saying the truth has been revealed at the TRC.
No other process at this stage will bring forward any more information apart from the information already supplied. So to say that to charge the persons to whom amnesty was not granted in an effort to obtain more information is quite absurd.
The fallacy is that the wounds are not closed. We're not opening them, they're there. If you talk to victims, you talk to families, they still want to know what happened.
28 years after her sister vanished, having been abducted and tortured, Thembi carries on with her life. Now she has 4 children, one of whom she has named Nocatula, after her sister.
I believe the TRC process was also a process which was going to make us comfortable with our own past, no matter how painful it is, so that we could be able to move on. We owe it to ourselves, for our country, and we owe it to the children. There has never been a family which will just sit on its laurel when it has lost one of its own and it has no answers. And if such an instance happens, therefore it will mean my children will have to take over from where Mommy left.
Now, Nocatula's family have approached the National Prosecuting Authority to request that an inquest be opened on her death. So watch this space for further developments. Tell us your views on this issue. If you're tweeting, use the hashtag special assignment, and you can also Facebook or email us. And do join the follow-up discussion on my radio show. That's on SAFM at 2:30 p.m. on Friday. Well, last week we brought you a rebroadcast of drug mules were used as decoys by recruiters and spent decades behind bars in foreign jails. I've taken out 2 comments from viewers from the show. Komotso Mashike tweeting, "If you plead ignorance where smuggling is concerned, if you take chances, you will rot in a foreign prison." And Mokhalkhadi Mkhebisi Facebooked, "Poverty will always attract the poor into the drug business. Cops must stop taking bribes from dealers. Then the supply will shrink." That's it for tonight. Join us again next week when we point out the issues that matter.